Other news, Scotland's First Minister has criticised the government after UK leaders were warned not to undermine Brexit negotiations. Theresa May hosted the leaders of Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland at Downing Street this morning. Her spokesperson said the Prime Minister expects them to in no way undermine the UK's position and that there won't be separate deals for each.
I'm the First Minister of Scotland. 62% of people in Scotland who voted in the EU referendum voted to remain. I wouldn't be doing my job if I wasn't out there talking to people to try to protect Scotland's interests. But the point I was going to make is I don't think I can undermine anything. I don't want to undermine anything, but I can't undermine something that doesn't exist. And at the moment it doesn't appear to me that there is a UK negotiating strategy, which is one of the sources of great frustration.
Well, joining us now is an expert in constitutional law, Michael Gordon from the University of Liverpool. Mr. Gordon, thank you for joining us on Sky News at 5. So, we've heard there from Nicola Sturgeon. She's the most outspoken at the moment. She wants it to be a special case as far as Scotland is concerned. Will it be?
Well, it's very difficult to say. I mean, I think at this early stage of the Brexit negotiations, there's an awful lot of tensions that we're seeing played out in the debates among the UK government and also then representatives of the devolved institutions as well. But the picture post-devolution in the UK, in a sense, is relatively clear. Devolution operates on the principle that some powers are given away to the institutions in some of the nations and regions of the UK, and some are retained. And it's explicitly the case that power over EU membership and foreign affairs is retained at the UK level. So in one sense, Nicola Sturgeon is right that it is very difficult for her to undermine anything in that sense, because the powers to conduct the Brexit negotiations do lie under our devolution system with the UK government. There are some complexities, though, that underlie that, and one of them Nicola Sturgeon alluded to in the clip you just played, the sort of clashing mandates that we see between the referendum results in Scotland and also Northern Ireland and England and Wales as well. And that gives us some real political capital to try and wield to influence the Brexit negotiations so much as she can. And no doubt today is just one part of that ongoing process, I think.
That's interesting. Develop that further for us.
OK, well, I think ultimately then the idea that, as was discussed sort of early on in the Brexit process, that somehow the devolved governments or institutions might be able to veto or block Brexit is probably incorrect. But they do have an awful lot of tools that they can sort of manoeuvre to try and influence the negotiations. And obviously, a key part of the debate at the moment is, are we moving towards a soft Brexit or a hard Brexit? What kind of access or membership even of the single market might be a part of that? And I think probably the kind of comments today following the Joint Ministerial Committee of Nicola Sturgeon, these are probably her best way of trying to influence that process to achieve an overall outcome for Brexit that suits her and Scotland best.
What sort of tools might they put into play, do you think?
Well, I suppose the ultimate nuclear option that Nicola Sturgeon and also leaders in Northern Ireland have is the idea of calling an independence referendum. And obviously, we've seen Nicola Sturgeon talking about the bill that's being published. And also in Northern Ireland, there was debate immediately in the aftermath of the referendum result, discussing the possibility of independence referendums as well. In Scotland, on one hand, they would need new power to be passed to them for an independence referendum to be held. So there would be another level of negotiation with Westminster before that could be achieved. In Northern Ireland, in contrast, there is a standing provision in devolution law already for a referendum to be held on independence for Northern Ireland. But it then falls to the UK Secretary of State for Northern Ireland to decide whether cross-community support exists so that such a referendum can be held. And both the current and the previous Secretary of State have said that there is no such support at the moment. So those independence referendums, maybe they don't look immediately likely, but they're the kind of tools that could be used again to sort of generate leverage and to sort of try and influence the Brexit negotiations. Ultimately, I suppose if the devolved institutions overplay their hand, then they might end up in a position where they're having to make some quite radical choices about whether to remain part of the UK as a result of our departure from the EU.
OK. Just before we let you go, I often get into an argument on Twitter, I know that's unusual for many of my regular followers, about whether or not Scotland has to adopt the euro if it leaves the United Kingdom and goes it alone and wants to remain within the European Union. It has to adopt the euro, yes or no?
Well, it's difficult, as you can imagine, but new members to the EU would have to adopt the euro. It's not clear whether Scotland really, there is any provision for it to be a remaining member of the EU after UK exit at all. There's big legal debates about that at the moment, so it's very difficult to say, unfortunately. No wonder there's big debate.
OK, good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed. Thanks a lot. Still to come on the programme for you, we've got all today's top stories and indeed the very latest sport. Stay tuned.